Sarah, the first couple of minutes of the Manufacturing Hub are a bit of community comments. I'm excited to have another roundtable. I'm excited to talk about supply chain. I think that this will be hours speaking of, and it is again something that Vlad has Vlad has had to leave the content in order for us to have a discussion. Can you guys,
Dave, your
okay,
internet cut out for most of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dave,
let me try that again. I got a pop-up saying that there was an issue on my stream. So let me go again. Everyone, welcome to Manufacturing Hub. As I was telling Nikki and Sarah as we were joining, that the first couple of minutes are typically community comments, and we are going to start chatting a little bit about supply chain. And it is a topic that we will get just the slightest little bit into, because it is something that Sarah and Nikki and, well, almost everyone on this talks about a whole lot more often than we do. But we are happy on Manufacturing Hub in order to chat about it a little bit as we get into it. And if you have not seen the show, everyone, welcome. Typically, I am normally with a guy named Vlad. Karim is joining us this week as Vlad has left on vacation. He may or may not be watching us. So Vlad, if you're in the comments, hey, I hope Cuba is good and warm and all of those other things. As we get ready to get in, we want to thank Phoenix Contact for sponsoring this episode and the entirety of the month of August. If you're new to the show, please go ahead and check us out on manufacturinghub.live, which is where you can catch the last 74 episodes. We do live shows Wednesday afternoons, and our podcast comes out on sometime on Thursday. We haven't quite hit the correct time that gets launched every week on Thursdays. But without further ado, officially, everyone, welcome to Manufacturing Hub with me and not with Vlad once again this week. This week, we are having a supply chain roundtable, and I'm very happy to welcome our guest, Sarah Scudder, marketing maven of SourceDay. And if you guys see her on LinkedIn, she's the one with the most awesome everything green. I am, in fact, wearing my green SourceDay hoodie, or my green SourceDay fleece, just for Sarah, and Nikki Gonzales from Quotebeam. Sarah, Nikki, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dave.
Absolutely.
I'm joining from Austin, my first summer here, and I am not used to hail and thunderstorms and lightning in the summer. So if my hair looks a little wild and crazy, you know why.
Okay.
Yeah,
I
my
like
hair
that.
Texas is not friendly to my hair either. I'm in Houston, by the way. So we've been having the thunderstorms lately.
Hashtag bad hair week.
I love it. I love it. I'd like to let everyone kind of introduce themselves a little bit more. Maybe talk. I know both Nikki and Sarah have at least one show that they do. So Sarah, could you give us and everyone in the audience a little bit more of an introduction on you, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So I thought by this stage in my career, I would be producing fashion shows. I did runway modeling in high school and was planning to pursue a career in fashion. I randomly, at the end of my senior year, was offered a job in an industry that I couldn't spell or knew absolutely nothing about, which was this crazy word called procurement and supply chain. I decided to take the leap and take the job at a very, very small company because I wanted to learn every aspect of business and thought my personality and style was more suited for small business versus going and working for a big company. So I spent the first part of my career in supply chain technology sales, actually selling into people in supply chain roles and specifically in marketing procurement. And as I progressed in my sales career, I decided that I absolutely loved demand generation and education and content production. So I decided to pivot my career from sales into marketing and embraced this crazy thing called LinkedIn about 3 years ago, which has changed my life in tremendous ways, both personally and professionally. And about 10 months ago, I joined SourceDay As the Chief Marketing Officer, we are a supply chain technology solution that automates purchase order changes. And one of the major verticals that we work in is manufacturing. I am a supply chain nerd. I talk about it all the time with every single person I meet. I'm obsessed with the color green. I wear it every single day in some capacity. Right now I have green toes. And I want to marry Bradley Cooper. I've been trying to get a dinner date with him for 3 years. My cell phone cover is a half-naked photo of Bradley. And if anybody knows him, I would absolutely love an introduction. He is still single and waiting to meet the woman of his dreams.
Love it.
That may be the best introduction anyone has ever done on anything. So
Probably.
thank you very much for Sarah. If any of our listeners knows Bradley Cooper, you know who to drop a message to on this show. Nikki, I'm not sure if I would want to go.
Follow that.
I was going to say, I'm not sure if I would want to go after that. So you're more than welcome to give a real introduction or just make something completely up. But for anyone who doesn't know you, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, please?
Yeah. Okay. To not make this an entire hour-long introduction of me, I'll try to be brief. I started working for my dad when I was in middle school at a small business. He's an engineer turned entrepreneur, and I got the bug to do business, but I never really knew exactly what I wanted to do. I loved having meetings with people and talking and figuring out their problems and jumping in wherever something needed to be done. So I made user manuals for terminals that go into trucks, and I went to trucking trade shows, and I made marketing material and all kinds of stuff. And I found my way into technical sales sort of accidentally. I got a business degree as an international business from UT Austin. I spent some time in Austin, loved it. Still didn't know what I wanted to do. So I looked for technical X roles that didn't require an engineering degree. And I ended up becoming a machine vision sales engineer with Keyence. And I moved out to the West Coast, again, inadvertently landing in the San Francisco Bay Area, not knowing what a treasure trove of innovation and amazingness I was landing into. I actually wanted to move to Seattle, but they didn't have any openings. And I got to go into factories of all kinds because the Bay Area is a little microcosm of all kinds of cool stuff, right? High-tech manufacturing, electronics, semiconductors, solar cells, and also poultry and plastic bottles and wineries and ice cream, and pretty much anything you can think of is either made in San Francisco Bay Area or the Valley in California. And I drove a lot of miles and visited a lot of factories. And machine vision is an amazing technology that I had a lot of fun with. It was also really stressful because I was the end-to-end salesperson and applications engineer and test person and technical support and trainer. And so I really got a crash course in, figuring out problems and making sure they work after the fact. And then I got really interested in the upstream and downstream stuff that was happening on the production lines that I was setting up inspections for. And so I realized I'm a perpetually curious person that enjoys myself most at the bottom of a steep learning curve. And once I really knew vision really well, I got bored with it. And I liked mechatronics, and I went to go work for Festo. And they actually had some supply chain issues back in 2012. And I had a hard time sleeping at night when some stuff I sold wasn't delivered on time, or I would get a notification or not a notification, a delivery got missed. And all of a sudden my customer's calling me and where is this part I ordered? It was supposed to be a 6-week lead time. And I check my system and it's like, well, now it shows another 3 weeks. And then 2 weeks from then it shows another 4 weeks. And I realized, as a salesperson, I was basically spending over half my time proactively managing these types of fires, sticking stock to the side. Proactively, I was keeping spares and samples in my trunk for customers to be able to fill in the gaps. And it was exhausting. So I went into software because at least if you sell it, it's already been made. And I went into virtual prototyping of electronic devices, doing electromagnetic simulation on physics-based modeling, different, some multi-physics, but mostly electromagnetics, looking at designing phones and putting antennas in the right place and designing for manufacturability and being able to run tests before you have to make physical prototypes. So that was extremely enlightening. I got frustrated with some of the technology that we were using. I was creating training classes and things like that, but I couldn't segment my customer base and invite them to the right trainings. Like, you don't want to invite an engineer that focuses on thermal simulation to a, low frequency motor simulation workshop. And so I foolishly did something I would never advise people: quit my job without a plan. Went to go work for a bunch of startups for equity or for free or for this or for that, just to kind of get the lay of the land and figure out what's going on out there. And I ended up working with a startup in the supply chain space, using big data and analytics to predict demand for items at a store level. And we were doing this mostly in the movie industry, which I had no experience with, but it's kind of where we found our niche and landed. And we were predicting which movie titles were going to sell at which Walmarts and Best Buys and Targets around the country, so they could actually ship the right amount and not have a bunch of overstocks and out of stocks at different locations. And that was a huge learning for me as well. I didn't know much about artificial intelligence and data science and marrying POS data with weather data and box office data and all this cool stuff to predict, to get a better handle on where we should be sending materials and where the demand actually is. And I did that for a while. And then I was speaking at a lot of conferences at the time. I was at an AI conference when my daughter, I guess she's in a rush like I am most of the time, decided to come 7 weeks early. And my water broke, and I sort of took some time off after that and came back into, it's a long story short, with Quotebeam, applying a lot of these really weird experiences that I've had. They kind of all come together in this software platform that we're building now to help modernize the procurement experience and the supply chain in the industrial automation world when it comes to finding and buying automation parts. And yeah, so I spend a lot of time now both helping build a company and a software and relationships, and at the same time kind of in the trenches procuring stuff for people that they can't find through their normal channels.
Wow, that is amazing. Thank you so much, Nikki. I think that this may be the most diverse roundtable we've ever had, especially with Karim up here. I think that there are 0 degreed engineers in this conversation, which has got to be a first for this show. So thank you very much for that, Nikki. I love that. I absolutely want to dig into more of all of that. But if I may, at first, I want to take us back a little bit more on manufacturing, on why I assume most people are currently listening to this show, right? So early, middle of my career, I spent some time working for a distributor's rep, for a distributor manufacturer's rep, right? Great company out of the Mid-Atlantic. One of their major vendors, Honeywell Process Solutions. At some point shortly before that, moved where they were producing from Pennsylvania, a drive away from where the headquarters was, down to Mexico. And I remember the first time I got a response at, like, I'm looking for a UDC, right? So I'm looking for a particular controller, and I'm like, guys, how long is it going to take, right? And so lots of times they might have it on the shelf and it's going to take a couple of weeks to ship up to Mexico. But what became more and more frequent is, hey, it's going to be 52 weeks, or it's going to be 26 weeks, but no one really believed the 26 weeks, so it was going to be 52 weeks. And I remember the first time I told a customer that it was going to be an entire year before they were going to be able to get their thing. And I thought that they were going to go crazy, right? So every once in a while, you get someone who was upset because they actually needed the thing. But more often than not, I found people were generally okay with, hey, we don't have it. It's going to be, 52 weeks, or we're assuming it's going to be 52 weeks, but we have no idea when it's going to be. And so I was talking to my dad somewhere around that point in time, and he was saying that when he started his career in the 70s, before we got to just-in-time inventory and before we leaned out the supply chain and we wanted to stock the smallest amount humanly possible, it was very regular for them to say, hey, it's going to be half a year or a year in order to get the parts. And so you did a little bit better of a job looking forward as to what you needed. You did a little bit better job putting parts on stock, right? And what I have found with my customers at that point in time, and also in the supply chain today, is because we don't know how long it's going to take, right? So we've got some vendors who are quoting, call it a year, right? But everyone knows that they're not actually going to hit the year target, and it may be 6 weeks and it shows up super early. It may be 72 weeks and it shows up super late. So what I find is that lots of people are over purchasing, right? So people are over purchasing, and they're buying more in order to make sure that they have the parts that they need. And that is very much congesting the supply chain. And I've also found something else that is interesting, and I'm gonna ask Nikki to speak on it, right? So I find that most smaller manufacturers, reps, distributors have parts. Lots of them have parts on shelves, but very few of them do a good job showing online the parts that they have. So I may order, my parts from Karim, and Karim tries to order it from the factory, but Karim could go purchase almost directly from Sarah because Sarah has 10 of these parts on the shelf. And I know, Nikki, you guys at Quotebeam have been doing a fair amount of working on trying to kind of understand what everyone in the market has parts-wise. Can you share a little bit of your experiences with that and having as many conversations as you've been having, please?
Yeah, so the thing is, our industry, it has these very complex channels through which they sell, right? The manufacturers, they sell some direct to some accounts. Some of them sell direct, some of them don't. Some of them sell through distribution or both. And you have there are, I think, about 17,000 independent distributors of electrical and automation and sort of industrial parts just in North America. A lot of them are fairly small, medium size, either, a lot of them are employee owned or family owned, or just, what you would consider small to medium sized businesses that serve their local customers really well. But they are not used to operating in sort of an online, global world. And they're definitely not used to these types of challenges where they can't get what they need from their vendors. A lot of distributors in North America have been conditioned to this more just in time and keeping lean inventory. So oftentimes they order what their big customers order. They keep that on the shelf because they know that their customer is expecting that, amount of, oh, we order something all the time, so we're going to, you're going to stock it for us. But their stocking decisions are usually based on just what their local customers are buying. And then they end up in situations where maybe a local customer had a project or a need for a long time, and then they stopped making that product, or they had a one-off project where they stocked some stuff and then didn't get sold. And they don't have any really outlet for that stock to get sold to somebody else because they're not looking at the broader market. Their salespeople are, taking phone calls and sending PDFs, and they're very reactive in a lot of ways. And so they end up with pockets of product that just sitting on their shelf that nobody in their local customer base wants. Sometimes they're sold that they've gone obsolete. They'll have layers of dust on them, and that's clogging up their shelves. And at the same time, they're making these sort of reacting decisions, both based on what to stock and then who they're selling to, which is unfortunate because now that we're in this situation where globally everybody, needs products that if they're on the shelf, there's definitely somebody out there that needs it. But there's no visibility between these distributors, and they often don't have, the vendors themselves don't have visibility as to what's in stock at their distributors. And again, this varies, by the vendors. Some of them have more sophisticated supply chains than others, where the distributors send back stocking reports or, they share POS data. But on the whole, our industry has been very siloed in terms of how it operates, the sales channels. And oftentimes the vendors don't know who the end users are, what the real demand is on the ground, because there's such a, removal of layers in that sense, and the sharing of information is somewhat limited. So it's led to this big mismatch in supply and demand. And the problem that's missing is the communication and the connectivity. So what we're on a mission to do is try to bring all this hidden stock to light, because when we work with distributors, to bring their inventory online, to be able to connect it to the internet, to users that are just looking for it, as well as procurement networks and, ERP connections. We're really all about, community and building a network where if we can, have some cooperation between the spokes of this channel infrastructure, then I think we can, do a lot more to help in the situation now short term, but also build something better for the future in the long run. Because one of the issues we have, I think, in manufacturing is it's hard to forecast what you need to be stocking and building if you don't know what the actual demand is either, because you don't have access to that information on a granular basis. So that's... We've seen some people like all of a sudden they listed something they've had on the shelf for 3 years and it got bought out in a day because somebody was desperately searching for it somewhere else in the country, but it just was not your local customer that you normally do business with.
Absolutely. I think those are great points. And so Arturo actually had a question in the comments that I'm going to let Nikki respond to, and then I'm going to ask Sarah if she sees similar things with her customers and the manufacturing companies that she works with. But Arturo is saying, what about absolute parts, right? And suggesting new parts available to replace it. So either equivalents or potentially updates of parts that may have been quoted 3 or 4 years ago. I would say that would be, best practices, right? So I don't have something that's the exact part number, but I have something that will do the same item. Are you seeing that? I guess 5, 6, 10 years ago, I was seeing very little of that being done, Nikki. Are you seeing more of that happening? Are you seeing people willing to go look for similar parts if it's not it has to be this exact part number per the engineering specifications?
It really depends. And it sometimes depends, is it the buyer that's looking and is the buyer educated as to what they're buying and what the critical specs are and what the trade-offs are and whether or not it's a part that they can upgrade without upgrading the entire machine. Sometimes there's a drop-in replacement. A manufacturer, will say this part's been discontinued. This is the recommended replacement. And then you have to be smart about, can you just drop it in, or are there specs that are critical that are different? And do you need to look at upgrading the whole machine or not? And that conversation is so different depending on if it's the engineer doing the looking around, or if it's a purchasing person or a buyer that knows anything about what they're buying, or they're just getting a description out of their ERP and saying, I need to buy this. And sometimes there's such a disconnect that they have a distributor specific part number, and they're trying to shop that around and ask for quotes. And it's like, well, that's not even a manufacturer's part number that anybody can match because it's specific to one particular vendor. So the trends, I don't know that I can say like everybody's doing this or that, but we absolutely need a way to help these non-engineer buyers understand that what the options are. So when people come to me and they say, I need part number X, and I go look for it. Sometimes I find it and we get lucky and you know what, let's fill the order and it's in stock. But when it's not, I always try to problem solve. Okay, what can we do? What, can you take this part number, which is very similar, but maybe it has a different spec, it has a coating on it that you don't need, but you could get away with, or it's a, push terminal instead of a screw terminal, or something that is not critical. And sometimes the buyer knows and sometimes they don't. Sometimes we have to go a few layers back. Let me go ask the engineer, or, and it takes a long time because there are it's basically these emails and phone calls are very inefficient because there's multiple parties involved. Finding the stock that exists and connecting it to the market is a short-term solution, because if there's a bunch of pockets of hidden obsolete parts, that's great for now. Once they get found and used, they're gone. So then we still need to address this obsolescence problem, which I think is a very multifaceted thing. It's not just on the procurement side, but it's on the maintenance, design, and operations side. Companies do need to make sure that they're keeping their equipment up to date and they're looking at, obsolescence planning, because at this point in time, when you're trying to react, if you don't have spares and you have an obsolete part and you're trying to replace it when a machine is down, you are in the worst position possible. And somebody might come and save you. And sometimes I'm that person and I love it, but that is not a long-term solution.
Absolutely. I would absolutely agree that it's not a long-term solution. I know people who call it a hero complex within sales folks who are going out and finding that obsolete part, or I can do something for you, and they do the proverbial digging through the shelves in order to find the part in the back that actually keep them up and running. I find that most of the time that other than folks like Nikki who have 17,000 distributors that they call all the time, most of the time that's gone. Like we ran out of those spare parts covered in dust 2 or 3 years ago. So I think that's absolutely a good point. Sarah, from your side, when you're dealing with end users, with manufacturers, are you seeing that they struggle through similar things where they're looking for potentially obsolete parts, and these obsolete parts are in other parts of industry, or what is the main pain point that you're seeing with your clients?
Yeah, so I like to break a supply chain down for a manufacturer into 2 parts: first mile and last mile. First mile is making sure you have the right supply base to be able to get the parts and materials you need on time in full, so you can meet your production schedule, and therefore you can then ship your product to the end customer. So the first mile is getting the parts and materials you need on time. And the last mile is the process of getting your finished parts or materials to your customer on time. In the last couple of years, there's been a huge focus on the last mile. So figuring out how to actually get your product to the end customer. I would argue that that's a big mistake, and manufacturers should be prioritizing the first mile of their supply chain. If you do not have parts and materials, you cannot manufacture your product. Therefore, you have nothing to ship to your end customer. So our company plays in the first mile space. And the biggest challenge that we see manufacturers facing today is supply shortage. Ordering parts and materials from a supplier and the supplier not being able to fulfill the order. Now, that may be that they can fill partial. That may be that they can fill the order, but it's going to be 2 months late. That may be that they can't fulfill any of the order at all. But the number one challenge our clients face is not being able to get the supply when they need it.
Okay. I like that a lot. I'd like to focus a little bit more on first mile, because as you mentioned, last mile has been in the news. I think it's been talked about on this show, right? We've had conversation. So when Aaron Prather, he was working at FedEx, he was on the show talking about robotics and drones. I think we had a conversation about drones delivering things. I know people working on the Rivian electric vans for Amazon's last mile delivery, right? I think lots of people know that. But I think the struggle of first mile is real, right? The struggle of first mile is, can I get the items? And so I'd like to talk about that a little bit more. Karim, let's go ahead and ask you what, based upon your experience in our conversations, what is your experience in first mile and the frustrations and pain points thereof?
Yeah, so I think you brought a good point where there was a lot of innovation in the last mile. A lot of companies, a lot of startups, a lot of money has been put up in the last mile with varying success, let's say. So it was it's arguable, and if we solve that, I see a lot of companies kind of abandon that and just basically decide, okay, we're just gonna try to outsource the last mile to some local companies, and so some things have been solved in a way, but to be honest, I've never heard of this concept of the first mile. I don't know. I don't see a lot of innovation happening around it. You don't hear about it in the news. You don't hear those buzzwords around. So I'm actually was curious about, Sarah and Nikki, what type of innovation have you seen in the first mile that were interesting? I mean, Source Day is one, of course, but have you seen any other interesting developments there that are worth pointing to, that you think maybe can pick up in the next couple of years?
I'm happy to bring one up that's not actually a technology innovation. It's just a change in mindset, which I think is actually the most important thing.
Yeah.
And there's been a big pivot in companies that really understand and value the supply chain and getting their products on time and in full, is this shift in that your supplier is your most important stakeholder. So 3 years ago, you would ask almost any buyer, and they would tell you that their internal stakeholders who run different departments or teams were their number one priority, trying to win over and get engagement. So they would use them so procurement could help source and procure and manage their contracts. Now, smart buyers will actually tell you their supplier is their most important stakeholder. And they've completely pivoted and shifted the entire structure of their team to put processes and systems in place to build out supplier management programs and to collaborate and have strong relationships with your suppliers. So that's the biggest mental shift that I have seen happen in the last 12 months. From an innovation standpoint, I would also say that data is so important. There's been a lot of talk about data. There's a lot of data solutions out there. I would argue that most people would tell you the data in their ERP is not very good and accurate, and they can't trust it, which leads to a major challenge. If you don't have good data, how do you know what to order? How do you know when to order? And how do you know who to order it from? So I think there's an opportunity for organizations to better innovate and find out a way to get better, clean data for the first mile of their supply chain, so they can then take that data and make better buying decisions. And of course, the third would be that what the problem that we actually solve is this issue around purchase order changes. Companies issue purchase orders, and our research shows that 52% of the time, purchase orders change. So Dave, if you issue a purchase order with 100 line items, 52 of those 100 are going to have changes. And if you ask a buyer how they manage those changes, if they have not embraced technology, they're doing it through email and spreadsheet. And then they're manually going back into the ERP and typing in those changes. Well, I know for me, if I got 1,000 emails a day from suppliers about supplier changes, I would miss an email. I would make a data entry error in a spreadsheet, and I would definitely make an error entering something into an ERP. Well, that error on a 5-cent part could shut down your production line for 2 weeks and have a significant impact on your revenue.
Absolutely. So I have so many pain points and frustrations to talk about of supplier changes purchase order changes. But first, I want to let Nikki comment on first mile and perhaps what she's seeing changing. Are the folks you guys are working with, Nikki, are they more focused on first mile? Is first mile even on their radar?
Well, I guess it's a little bit different because we are sort of working currently in the distribution space, although I am doing more work to help the vendors or manufacturers that are making, and we're talking like PLCs, parts that go into machines, primarily automation machines. Spares for manufacturers, right? MRO stuff is also important, but we work with a lot of panel builders, systems integrators, OEMs that can't ship machines right now because there's a few pieces missing. You can't ship a machine if it doesn't have all the parts. So I don't know if you would call that. I mean, the parts that go into a machine are technically first mile for a machine builder, but it's last mile for the vendor of, let's say if it's, and I don't want to name names, but like the PLC vendor, right? For them, that's last mile, and their issue is the first mile. The reason they can't deliver product is because they're missing something on their bill of materials for the first mile, whether it's chips, which is oftentimes the case for electronic products. It might be certain polymers or plastics right now because of, war and geopolitical stuff. It might be, there's a variety of different raw materials that go into automation and electronic components. And so that's another whole, very complex reality right now, and they can't deliver because they can't get the goods, right? And then the machine builder can't deliver their machine because they can't get the goods, and then the manufacturer can't increase their capacity because they can't get the machines. It's, it's a whole thing. So yes, we're thinking a little bit about the first mile because we've started to help the vendors source the chips that they need to be able to produce the parts. We're also seeing some more, some vendors are buying, let's say, batches of chips, and they're making a new part number that's just slightly different from the old part number because it's functionally equivalent, but some spec of the chip they used on this production run is different than the last one. And to most customers, it probably doesn't matter, but to customers with maybe extreme conditions that rely on the fringe specs of this part needs to work in, extremely cold environments, maybe this new chip doesn't meet that spec. So there's just a lot of, in our industry, it's kind of, we've gone for a very long time buying the same thing from the same vendors. Ideally, we spec something in and we keep making the machine that way. And we send the same PO to the same vendor over and over and over. And, the prices relatively stay the same. They go up a little bit every year, but you kind of can expect that, hey, you send your PO to your local distributor, they're going to fulfill it, you're good to go. That has gone out the window. And our industry is really not set up for this complex management of multiple vendors and sourcing from multiple vendors. We're very tied into, and in some cases contractually, we have to buy a product from a specific company and we can't go elsewhere. And that's a huge problem right now because there's no flexibility. And then how do you figure out where else you can buy from? And even if you find somebody to set up an account and start a new relationship, I mean, it's a lot of paperwork, right? And just like Sarah's saying, these purchase orders and these documents, we're sending in credit applications with bank account information. We're sending credit card authorization forms via email, or calling people and having them write down our credit card number, and who knows where they're writing it down and whether or not they're being safe about it. Setting up vendor terms. If I wanted to buy some power supplies from my local distributor last week, and it's taken so long to set up the account that I bought them online somewhere instead for more, because it just is not worth the headache of spending the hours it takes to do the administrative tasks to buy something from a new vendor for a one-time thing. And that's really the problem. A big part of the problem that we're trying to solve, with Quotebeam is just like SourceDay is, automating the PO change communication. We need to have a better way to collaborate with vendors. And I think the old days of just saying, okay, we're going to go with the best price or send out 3 RFQs and buy from whoever, quotes us the cheapest. That is absolutely short-term thinking, because nowadays we have to work together. And like Sarah said, your suppliers are strategic stakeholders in your business, and they can tank you. If you can't get goods, you can't make your product, you can't sell anything, what are you going to do? And I think we need to move away from the short-term, what can you do for me on this order, thinking, or I'm going to make a profit here on this one short-term thing. We have to start thinking long-term. How do we all help each other get through this, and then have relationships where we can be flexible and collaborative in the way that we do things and not spend all of our extra energy on paperwork? Because I call a lot of distributors a lot of the time, and when they don't have something, they don't have the time or the energy or the will. I don't know why or what it is, but they don't ask how they can help me. They say, sorry, I don't have this. You want me to check factory lead times? So like, well, I already know the factory lead time. That's why I'm calling you. And then they just say goodbye. Thank you. Because they are so busy and harrowed with emails and phone calls and all these things that they can't even take the time to try to establish a relationship, which is a sad indicator, of even if we wanted to try to do more business and find the right customers and all of that, it's very hard when you have people that are just buried in busy work and fighting fires all day long.
Absolutely. I think that all of those are very good points. I think kind of to what Nikki, you were saying, and Sarah, kind of your comments, a lot of it is a mindset shift and almost an organizational change shift, right? That there is not a piece of software that can suddenly come in and make this problem better. It's a how we do business. We need to change how we do that in order to be better as an organization, better as kind of an industry as a whole. So I promised a story. So Sarah was saying on average 52% of items coming in on a purchase order or change. So Sarah, I was doing some work with a client, right? So they make beers and seltzers similar to kind of like White Claw style drinks, and they make lots of them, and almost every single one of them is a one-off, right? So they've got a couple of orders that will come in and they'll run the same quantity every month, but basically everything else is a one-off. It's by itself. They all change slightly. And one of their biggest pain points was, hey, I'm getting ready to go run this order, and then the internal group that comes and buys 10% of our product, or one of the vendors is like, oh, I know you guys are getting ready to run this in a week or 2 weeks. I've decided I want to add more peanut butter to my beer, or I want to add this extract, or I want to add, this fruit. And a big part of their issues were, hey, there is lead times for these, right? So if it's something that we have on the shelf, we can add it, but it changes literally the entire recipe and how we do business along with that. But if it's not something, there are some drums of fruit, they take 4 or 8 or 16 weeks to come in, and they come in frozen, so you have to thaw them. So there are issues that they have of, hey, we are potentially in the process of running this, and now you want us to go back and kind of redo the whole process in order to add this, but it's going to add 16 weeks, and we've got to dump what we have, or maybe in theory leave it in a tank that we don't have tank space for. So that became a large issue. So it became with those guys, it was an organizational change, a mindset shift of, at some point, we have to lock in, you guys have X amount of time to potentially change what this looks like, but call it a reliable lead time of 4 weeks. Once you're within 4 weeks, if you'd like to make any changes, then you guys go back to the end of the queue, and that may be 16 weeks out. And there's a cancellation charge because you guys have canceled the run that we have slotted in for that. And so for them, it was very much an organizational change. Is that, now I'd like to go around and kind of get the thoughts. Sarah, is that the kind of organizational changes that you're seeing companies have to go through and make in order to be successful in the first mile?
I would say the stakeholder management piece, absolutely. In your example, that was more of managing internal stakeholders and getting buy-in on the entire process. My friend runs procurement and manufacturing for a company called Reese Foods. They have an office in California, just opened an office here in Dallas. And when I was interviewing her a couple weeks ago, she mentioned how important it's been for her success to partner and collaborate with the ingredients and innovation team. Because going back to your example, if they come to her with a design or a product that is crazy to source and procure, it's going to have a huge impact at all aspects of the company if they're not able to get the parts or materials or things in a timely manner to hit production schedules. So yes, stakeholder management, whether it's internal or external, is absolutely imperative to make sure that you have a smooth operating first mile in your supply chain.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think that is, that's a very good point. I would say, kind of to add to your point, Sarah, I've seen more companies go back to the engineering teams many times and say, hey, what can we do to potentially optimize the process, right? This product that we're using is very similar to the product that we were using in the last run of things. Can we use the same product and not have to order 2 slightly different products and hold 2 slightly different products on the shelf? So what can we do to minimize different items as we go through the process?
Or you have a Tesla that is now redesigning their cars because of the chip shortage. So you also have the idea of, instead of, somebody asked earlier about using replacement parts, I'd go a step further and say companies are actually completely redesigning the products that they sell because of the supply chain challenges.
Absolutely. So we actually had Benson on earlier, I think in January, from Opto 22, and he spoke of in January how he and his organization were redesigning and re-engineering some of the products they use in order to keep items on the shelf all the way back in January, and they were able to be successful in that. We've had some comments talk about how it doesn't fly in all industries. So especially very regulated industries, pharmaceuticals, medical devices, industries like that, it becomes this is what we've engineered the product for. We cannot have any changes of that. So there are certainly some industries that that have issues making changes or re-engineering kind of on the fly. But I think those are fantastic examples. Nikki, what are you seeing organizational change-wise, things that people are doing in order to stay competitive in this market?
So I think better collaboration between the engineering and purchasing functions is critical at this point. A lot of times in the past, engineers could design whatever they want and then just throw it over the fence and say, go buy it. And that's kind of no longer the case. Just like purchase order changes, you have to be amenable to, because we're seeing a lot more purchasers and buyers going, okay, I have to go back to engineering now and figure out if this spec is important, or what is the cost, what's the trade-off between buying these parts at inflated prices because we found them and they exist, but there's a shortage in the market and the price reflects that, versus redesigning the product, spending the engineering time to redesign it. And then, redesigning it to use what? Something that may be in short supply again 3 months from now? Or, we definitely need more interoperability in our industry. And that's, an unfortunate function of this sort of go-to-market strategies and competitive climate is trying to motivate people into using certain technologies. I think manufacturers and machine builders are starting to look at, okay, how can we utilize more different vendors and be more flexible. And part of that has to do with the entire support ecosystem around these technologies, right? To not so much to the organizational change piece, but supply chains are just really complex things. They are global, and as much as we want to reshore manufacturing, it is impossible to for instance, move a mine of rare earth minerals or sources of gases. And highly regulated industries, speaking of that, semiconductors is one of them. Not so much necessarily for the regulation, but for the processes. They are so niche and specific, and they have to be so clean that, you can't use a regular valve for things or tubing. It has to be high purity, semiconductor standard, very specific. And there are not, in some cases, there's 1 or 2 companies in the world that can produce the parts that go into semiconductor machinery. So even when we talk about increasing chip fab capacity, there's supply chain constraints in building more chip fabs. So it is very much a systems problem where there are a lot of inputs and a lot of outputs. And every time we adjust one, you have to adjust the whole system. And I think we have to start thinking more in terms of collaboration and not silos, both internally in our companies between departments and externally with our customers and in some cases our competitors. We can all, go at this alone and hit our heads against the walls competing with each other, and we all lose because none of us have product to sell or machines to ship, and that doesn't help anyone. So I think, in my mind, the biggest mindset change we need in our industry is working together instead of, this constant competitive, I'm going to keep my customer only with me, or, at this point, we all need to figure out how to do this. And then in the long run, how to, once this, short-term problem is overcome, how do we change our industry so that not every big geopolitical issue or natural disaster or some other thing knocks us out once again? Because we need to automate more. And, coming from the automation side of manufacturing, we need more and more and more of it. And there's plenty of business out there for everyone. We just need to figure out how to work together.
I would also say, Dave and Nikki, that I think something else that's really been important this year is the pivot away from single sourcing. So many manufacturers rely on one supplier for key parts and materials. They've had long-term relationships. They have no second or third option. Well, this became a major issue when COVID hit and this single sourced supplier could no longer fulfill the orders. So I would say that one of the things I've seen buyers and supply chain leaders prioritizing this year more than most other things is going out and finding multiple suppliers for absolutely everything you buy. And when I say multiple suppliers, it's also important to look at that from a perspective of where your suppliers are located, and making sure that if you do have multiple suppliers, they're in different parts of the world. So you look at Russia and Ukraine and some of the other things happening right now. If my entire supply base right now is in Russia or Ukraine, I'm screwed. So I want to make sure that I have a supply base that is in multiple locations in case of a natural disaster, in case of a war, in case something happens. So if you are working in manufacturing and you have single sourced items, I highly recommend prioritizing, establishing, and building out your supply base.
Absolutely. I was going to say, I think all of those are fantastic. I think all of those are fantastic points. And to distill it down, I think Nikki said something to the effect of supply chains are very complex. I think that is the highlight for everything that we've just said. Karim, what was your comment going to be?
Yeah, I was wondering if you had any, maybe Sarah, maybe if you had any framework or something to suggest around supplier diversification, right? Because how many suppliers should you think about? How many different suppliers? How do you evaluate these regions? Because it's, I think for bigger companies that makes sense. Maybe they have the manpower to do that, but I think for mid-size companies, maybe they don't have that expertise in-house. Maybe they don't have the manpower to do it. Where should they get started? Well, how should they think about it with limited resources?
So for small and mid-market manufacturers that want to diversify the supply base, two things I'd recommend to start with. One is, can you bring anything in-house? I've seen companies bring some manufacturing in-house where they've never thought about it, produced something before, and it's worked out very well for them because, one, they're depending on themselves to produce and manage their own supply, but it's also opened up and created additional revenue streams where they can then sell that product to competitors and other manufacturers in the market. The second thing is look locally. There are a lot of opportunities in local markets and in local economies that have not been explored. So leverage your network, go on LinkedIn, go on your dark social channels, your networking groups, ask other people in wherever you're based who they're using and who some of their local suppliers are. And I think some people will be really surprised, and they didn't realize they had such a wealth of suppliers in a more local region than they've ever considered before. And then the third is there a way to re-engineer some of your products where you can change up your supply base? I mentioned the Tesla example, but I'm seeing lots of other manufacturers do this as well, where they have certain set of suppliers that is diversified and perform well, and they're struggling to find other suppliers in other areas. Look at a product redesign, and that may help you with your supply base.
I love that. I think that those are great examples. As we are getting close to the end of this, I again want to thank Phoenix Contact for sponsoring for sponsoring this theme. And Vlad's not here, so typically this is the point where I would slightly embarrass him, asking people to subscribe to Solus PLC. But he's not here, so just imagine Vlad up in the top left corner, slightly blushing as I talk about the new Phoenix Contact Solus PLC collaboration course that they have out. So if you're looking to figure out how to use a PLC Next, which is when Vlad would normally hold up a PLC Next, but again, he's not here. Go check out Solus PLC. There's a new course that has come out at the end of last month. You can learn how to do ladder logic, structured text, function block. There's Modbus. They're looking to add MQTT and a bunch of additional items to that course in the coming future, plus the whole learn how to start from everything with the PLC Next engineering program. Again, we want to thank Phoenix Contact for sponsoring this. Check out solusplc.com. You'll have all of the information on the PLC Next starter course in there. As we are running close to up to time, this has been an amazing conversation. I think I say it every week. This is one of those that we could go talk for 6 hours, and I don't think even 6 hours would get us like into the depths of supply chain. So, last questions as we go around, but before we wrap up, Sarah, can you tell everyone where you talk about all things supply? I know you have 2-3 shows where you talk about supply chain. Can you tell everyone where they can find you as you talk about supply chain, and maybe any last closing thoughts or comments, please?
Yeah, so best way to reach me is on LinkedIn. I'm a bit of a LinkedIn addict. 2 hashtags that I've created that I use are Manufacturing Maven and Women in ERP. I host 4 LinkedIn live shows, so I go live every single week. I've got a Voice of Supply Chain show, a Women in ERP show, Supply Chains Trends show, and a Manufacturing Woe show, which is probably most relevant to this audience. I have guests come on. Nikki's coming on. Dave is actually coming on the show as well. And people talk about the absolute train wrecks and nightmares that they've lived through and survived in manufacturing. It's the ugly, dirty, we don't want to sugarcoat anything type show. So if that's of interest to you, if you want to listen in ever and or come on as a guest, shoot me a note on LinkedIn. I would say my closing thought is take a look at your supply chain, and anything that is being done that can be automated, try to automate it so you can free up your team's time to focus on more strategic activities.
I love it. Thank you, Sarah. But before I let Nikki go and talk about the same things, there are so many comments. Everyone, thank you for all of the comments and questions. It's literally blowing up the entire right-hand side of my screen. If we have not got to them, we will absolutely get to them after the show. With that, Nikki, can you tell everyone where to find you, about Automation Ladies, and any closing thoughts on supply chain, please?
Sure. Yeah. So you can find me on LinkedIn as well. I don't have time for any other social media. I've got kids and I do this. I'm in it all day. So message me on LinkedIn. If you're looking for parts, you can go to quotebeam.com, and some of it is online. Some of it is in the process of being online. So always just drop a note in the chat when you're looking for something. We will help you. So to the point of companies that don't have the resources or the know-how or the time to find multiple suppliers to chase their problem, 20% of the BOM that they just can't deliver, that's what we can help with right now. It's our low-hanging fruit while we're developing and connecting all this data and all these vendors. It's a big, complex problem we're tackling, but we think it's necessary and we're doing it. And in the meantime, we're filling the gaps by using our network and relationships and community, right? Sometimes I'm not the one that solves the problem, but I know somebody that can solve the problem. A systems integrator that stocked a bunch of stuff that they're willing to let go of, for somebody that really needs it, but they're not out there advertising it. Those sorts of things I can help with. Also, different distributors around the world have had different habits. There are places where they're used to stocking more. They have more stocking orders available than here in the US. But to Sarah's point, it's difficult for a small company to even buy something overseas. I mean, it's complicated. You think you can just buy it and get it shipped with DHL or FedEx, and it's not that simple. So we can help with all those problems and just be kind of that helping hand. If you're a machine builder and you need some better way to source your bill of materials, we're developing stuff for that. I really want to talk to everyone in the community, learn how we can help them solve their problems. Not to just pitch that we're selling parts. It's really the least of my interest, but that's where I can be of a lot of help right now. So please reach out to me for that. Automation Ladies. Yeah. So our industry is not terribly diverse. We're all trying to do better, right? And I've been in it for a long time, and I've always just kind of oftentimes been kind of the only woman in the room, or one of a handful or a few. And LinkedIn is an amazing community where I've been able to find some ladies in my space that are into the weird stuff that I am and love robots and valves and burner controls as much as I do. And Allie and I found each other. She's out in the field all the time building stuff. I sometimes help her, find parts and ship them to wherever she's building. And we decided that, there are probably people out there that want to have those conversations and talk about, all the different things that we get up to in automation. We love to talk to different people in different positions. I personally I know more about automation than I do about, millwrights or maintenance department. There's all kinds of stuff to learn in the industry, and we just want to bring some different conversations that maybe the C-suite and the executives and the thought leaders aren't having. And it's just, adding a little bit to the discourse, bringing some of us into the community. That's really what Automation Ladies is about. So you can follow our page. We are still in the process of getting our podcast episodes out there. They're in production, but we are going to be starting up doing it more of a regular as a LinkedIn Live, because part of, the biggest bottleneck is us. We're so busy with our day-to-day work, and we just got to force ourselves to get out there. So you'll see our LinkedIn Lives if you go to our page. They'll be starting very soon. So yeah, that's where you can find me, and, check out Automation Ladies. And if we can help you through Quotebeam or any other way with whatever problems you're having, or, we can help be part of the team if you don't have the time or the resources to find those extra vendors that you should be working with. Or we're working on also just standardizing some of the data and attributes across all the different manufacturers, because of course they don't want to do it themselves, right? But it's for the end user, it's absolutely necessary, or the machine builder, to be able to find alternatives. And when everybody's data is in different formats and different places and different types of PDFs and spreadsheets, and it's just very difficult to get that done. So anybody that wants to help with that cause by bringing their data and, being a part of the change, please come find me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nikki. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Again, this has been Manufacturing Hub, the first of what I hope will be many supply chain roundtables. Please feel free to like and subscribe and do all of those great things. And we will see everyone back Wednesday, same time, same place. Thank you all.